Good evening, it's Mark Hill from Green Leaves here. Without wanting to seem boastful, I just wanted to recount some of the campaigns that I've been involved with over the years. I cut my teeth originally in the peace movement, opposing things like the arrival of cruise missiles, President Reagan's cruise missiles here in the UK. And then there were demonstrations against things like the National Front in the cenotaph in the early 80s. I protested against civil defence in several districts of Britain. I campaigned against the Battle of the Beanfield, where hippies were beaten up and their trucks and coaches demolished by the police in a completely unprovoked attack. I led a rent strike at my university. I helped lead a demonstration against the forcible deportment of Libyan students at the time when Libya, Gaddafi's headquarters, was bombed by the UK and America. Campaigned against nuclear proliferation. Campaigned for anti-apartheid, including the large demonstration against the president of South Africa, then apartheid South Africa, who came to visit Margaret Thatcher during the middle of her term. I campaigned against something called red routes, which are now quite common in London, but were tried out first in North London, where I was living at the time, which prevented pedestrians being able to cross their local streets. I campaigned against the extension of the M11, including involving myself with the direct action there at Leytonstone, the Newbury bypass protest. I was involved in overdevelopment campaigns in a number of places, particularly greenfield sites that were taken over by large retail outlets. I involved myself with the critical mass campaign in a number of towns, and supported pedestrianisation campaigns, including occupying a street in several places. I was arrested a couple of times at Menwith Hill, the US air base in North Yorkshire. I was a campaigner against British membership of the single currency in the late 90s. When that was being considered by the then newly elected Blair government. Campaigned against emissions from the Drax coal-fired power station. As with many, I campaigned against the Iraq War. I've campaigned against genetically modified organisms and the Paris Carbon Reduction Conference, which failed to reduce carbon emissions. Perhaps the protest that I'm most proud of at this moment is the protest in York for the creation of the single currency. It was something called an ECOFIN conference, which at the time was being attended by Gordon Brown, who was then Chancellor in 1999, and he came to my then town York in order to be able to set the terms of the convergence criteria, which became the basis of the single currency and then ruined so many lives across southern Europe. Mercifully, we then campaigned successfully for a referendum on membership of the British membership of the single currency, and the fact that they would have to cross that hurdle of winning a referendum was enough to deter Tony Blair, despite his incredible popularity at that time, from taking Britain into the single currency. So we didn't suffer the effects quite as badly as so many other countries that were suffered compulsory institutional recession. And during that protest, I stood with people who had very different views to mine, but also some who had identical views to mine. At that protest, for example, I was campaigning alongside Councillor Mike Woodin, who was then the principal speaker of the Green Party, and we were protesting against Gordon Brown and his fellow European finance ministers going into the York Guildhall to go and set the terms, which then, as I said earlier, destroyed so many lives. And all of this should give you some hint as to why I am so disappointed that many who consider themselves of the left, anarchist, protesters, direct action supporters, are so curiously aghast when I say that I'm also opposed to the European Union and its centralism and its bureaucracy and its dismissal of democracy, a process that we have seen so thoroughly explored in the past nearly 3 years since the 2016 referendum decided to take Britain out of the European Union. And at this particular time, I'm also thinking of a large chain of protests that I was involved in, and so many others of my age, against Margaret Thatcher's hated poll tax. A poll tax that was destroyed eventually by non-payment and the inability of the Conservatives to actually follow through on the desperate, appalling legislation that they had managed to craft. And that eventually cost a female Prime Minister for the Conservative Party her job. It's funny how the worm turns.